The Growing Up Brooklyn podcast is a Black Pharaoh Gaming production.
Welcome to the Growing Up Brooklyn podcast. I'm your host, Coach Ty, and today I got a special treat for you guys. So let me give you a little backstory here. A very good friend of mine's, aka the Queen of Cash Flow, told me about a gentleman that I had to have on my podcast, and she mentioned that he skates. And as soon as she said the word empire, I said, "Oh no, we got to book him right away." There was no way I was not going to have the gentleman on the show and get to hear the great stories about the infamous Empire roller rink. So please, everybody, welcome to the podcast, Mr. Eric Alston. Eric, thank you for joining the podcast today. How you doing?
I'm doing excellent with a capital E. It's my pleasure and honor to be here.
Listen, man, and like I said, man, I growing up in Brooklyn, I skated as a little kid. Went to Empire a couple of times, more so for birthday parties, but definitely can't wait, to hear the stories. And I got a couple of, Empire versus Skate Key questions I want to ask as well. So,
oh man, you came to the right place for that. Oh,
I
yeah.
know for sure,
Mm-hmm.
man. So, can you share with us your earliest memory of growing up Brooklyn?
My earliest memory is the elevator. See, when you're in the projects, and our buildings had 20 stories, right? So the elevator, getting in the elevator, it was a thing. Everybody waiting in the lobby for the elevator, and getting on the elevator, letting the women on first, and then they would let the kids on, and we would get on the elevator and go up and down in the elevator, and they would stop at various floors, and you started knowing where people lived because if you rode the elevator, well, you know who lived on 8, who lived on 10, who lived on 12, because I lived on the 12th floor. If you lived past my floor, I didn't know where you lived until I got older. So
Gotcha.
the reason why the elevator is my earliest recollection was because when people were waiting for the elevator, conversations were ensuing. People were making introductions. They were, discussing things. Who went to what school? Maybe somebody broke their leg, or changes in the building, and who moved out, who moved in. So the elevator was the first kind of gathering spot.
Yeah.
The elevator, yeah, because you had to take that elevator. And then when we got a little bit older, like when I say older, 6, 7, maybe 8, depending on who your mother was, the elevator might get stuck. Like they might not close on a certain floor, and they'd be like, "Oh, it's stuck on 11, or it's on 13." So if you were the young buck, you had to run up the steps and unstick the elevator. And when you rode it down, you came down, you were a hero because ain't anybody walking up 15 flights of stairs and 17 flights of stairs. So another thing about the elevator, and I'll touch more on this a little later on, is the elevator was also the first sign of dysfunction. It was a sign of how good the maintenance crews were early on,
Right.
and how they really didn't care. Or I can't say they really didn't care. Maybe they didn't have the resources, or they were swamped with so many other types of calls. They couldn't come and get the elevator running. And when the elevator would be out like a week, it was, and then only one elevator was running. That was like a huge thing. So my earliest recollection is the importance of the elevator. And then my second real takeaway from my growing up is going to school. I went to PS 257. It was like you had to go to the other side of the projects and cross the street. So that's a big thing, crossing the street, and they used to have these commercials on, cross at the green, not in between, because you get smashed out by the cars. Like, it's crazy. Like, I remember how big of a deal it was that once you got walked to the school a couple of times, you was on your own. And at the corner, they had the crossing guard, but getting across the projects to the other side to cross the street was like a journey. It was a trek. As you got older, you realize it wasn't that far, but it was like going from, Europe to Antarctica. It was like a distance,
Right.
and I learned this thing called perception and context. Our perception as kids was like, first of all, summers was so long, from June to September was a lifetime. And the context is this. I heard a discussion based on how fast time passes. And there was a think tank, and they had all these great minds there and all the rest. And they had people from various, endeavors or whatever. And they had a guy there, he was a plumber with a 9th grade education. And everybody's credentials were on a card in front of them. So you had people with 2 degrees, PhDs, CEO of this and whatever. And they had this guy, plumber, 9th grade education. So they were all talking, and they brought pizza in. And if you know anything about pizza, good pizza, you can smell it before you see it. So I guess he wanted to cut the conversation short. So he said, all of you are wrong. Your time is relative to your age. So they all was like, what does this guy know? Whatever. He said, well, when you're a kid, uh, 1 year is a 30 life. That's a pretty big slice. And he got up and went over to the pizza boxes. I'll show you. And he sliced one of the pieces in the third, and he picked it up and put it on his plate. And it illustrated how big it was. It was a third of a pizza.
Yeah.
And then he said, when you're 50, and he made a bunch of little slices of the pizza, he said, a year is a smaller piece of your life, so it goes by relatively quickly. And he put it in his mouth. Everybody looked at each other, and it resonated. So the third thing about my upbringing in Brooklyn and my earliest recollection is about how vastly different people's perspectives were on the same experience. And I learned that 2 things can be true at the same time. So those are my top 3 takeaways from my earliest childhood recollections. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's amazing because my mom lived in Penn in East New York, Brooklyn, on the 12th floor, and we had 2 elevators, and most times only one worked. And so as you was telling that story, it was giving me a good flashback because I remember being the shorty running upstairs and
Yes.
unsticking the elevator,
Yeah.
or in boulevard houses, making sure the door was all the way closed so the
Yeah.
elevator could operate. So.
Yes.
Oh man, that's like I said, that was a great common memory, man. That definitely brought back some good thoughts
Yeah. It's definitely called a project perspective.
here. We definitely got to get that on a shirt, the project
Oh yeah,
perspective.
project perspective. There you go. Look, and it was coined here first, and we recorded it. So go on.
For sure. So how would you describe the atmosphere or culture of Brooklyn when you were growing up? What was it like then?
Well, first of all, it was an amazing sense of community, and within that community, it was a lot of subsets. So the overall community was, I grew up in an era where you respected your elders, and there were lines that people didn't cross. There wasn't a lot of cursing in front of people older than you, especially people's mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and also it was like we had 2 staircases as well. And on the staircase was a culture. There was one staircase, it was clean, all the lights were on, and the families went up and down the staircase. Then we had the back staircase.
Yeah.
That's where the people hung out and all of, activities that were less than sterling occurred. And
Right.
you didn't go down the back staircase unless you were part of the back staircase culture,
Hmm.
or maybe you might go from one flight to the next because it was closer to your apartment. But other than that, you stayed on the well-lit side
Yeah.
where all the families went. Me, I was drawn to the dark side early in life, and I stayed on the back staircase. It was a sense of like adventure. It was like forbidden,
Right.
So the back staircase was a thing. So in regards to me talking about community and subsets, so you had working mothers, you had stay-at-home mothers, you had uh, fathers who, and at noon they were sitting in front of the building. They had other fathers, they were out. You never saw them. You only saw them like if you were there when they were coming home. Like you didn't see them in the morning because they were out early and they were out all day, and most of them were working. And I remember one comedian talking about the reason why their parents' relationship lasted so long was because when the father left the house, he didn't have. I think it was Chris Rock. Matter of fact, I know it was Chris Rock.
Yeah,
His mother and father didn't have communication with each other from the time he left until the time he came home. It wasn't all this checking in, text messages, FaceTime and all this other stuff where people constantly were connected. So they had a chance to like miss each other.
Yeah.
And so there were also other subsets there. There were the teenagers. There were the, elementary school subset. Then there were the women, the men. Then there were people who partied. And party didn't necessarily mean the same thing then. Party
Right.
meant going out to dance.
Yeah.
Party meant hanging out. Nowadays, party means, chemical influences. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And that was a
unfortunately, yes.
part of it, but that wasn't the predominant reason people said they party. So, I understood that there was also people who they were like kind of like impaired, and not because of drugs, alcohol. They were impaired because of experiences. Like some people they had undiagnosed mental diseases. Back then, the word retarded was not politically
Incorrect.
incorrect or
Right.
insensitive. It was what we called them. And it actually is an accurate description of their growth process, but it really provided somewhat of a negative connotation. You thought of them drooling and, picking their nose and eating the boogers and stuff like that. So we also learned that there were people who were returning. Now, I must say at this point, I was born in 1962, and a lot of my formative years were in the 60s, which were a turbulent time in history and in America in particular.
Right.
And I share this frequently now because I understand the historical context. The Voting Rights Act was voted in 1964. It wasn't enacted into law until August of 1965. My baby sister was born July 31st, 1964. So nobody in my immediate family was born with all their rights.
Right. Right.
Okay, so now the context was people died for us to vote. And the voting rights, I came in, and as I got a little older, the significance of Medgar Evers, Marcus Garvey, and Malcolm
Mm-hmm.
X, and Martin Luther King gained ever greater significance because we became more aware of the world around us. So the
Right.
community of people who are aware of the times they were in versus the community that was being ushered into that era and witnessing it firsthand, because things that were current events to me, people reading about in textbooks, like the first, I must air quote at this point, moon landing by the
Right.
United States, and certain other things that took place that I now know. I was taught to question everything. And let me tell you my context on that.
Okay.
All my life, there was 9 planets. And then we got better instruments, better information. And then they said one of them's not even a planet by definition. And then we found out that according to science, which science is organized curiosity, they have ways of verifying things. It's called facts. Facts can change based on who you are, what you know, and information you're using to establish those facts. So facts tell a story. Facts tell us what happened. Facts establish context. And once the facts are established, you can have an opinion about the facts, but doesn't
Right.
change the facts. So the facts are there's a lot more in the sky than just blue. And we're finding out what those things in the sky are. So by definition, there are more planets than just the ones in this system that we've been told about all along.
Right.
So it gave me a sense of how the community worked me growing up. The community that you speak of, what was my earliest recollection of community and how, or what influences there were. The influences were at the level I was at. So I'm
Right.
describing the things that where I was at, and now I know a little differently. So the immediate influences were the men who were in the projects. A lot of them they were returning from Nam, bro, and they were returning with
Yeah.
undiagnosed illnesses like PTSD. They
Mm-hmm.
also came back with a lot of them with heroin habits,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then alcoholism, and a lot of them they were uprooted because they had the draft then when they were
Right.
like just approaching, young adulthood and manhood,
Yeah.
and they were
18,
thrust,
19.
yeah, they were thrust into situations that no human can adequately prepare for. Like they can see in the basic training and tell you how to fire a firearm and duck and how to detonate stuff, but they couldn't tell you how to deal with the aftermath of that. So they went through
Right.
all this. They returned home and they returned to the communities they left as 18-year-olds, as 22, 24, 26, and they returned to in the 70s there was an economic crisis, so they couldn't get jobs. The country was divided over whether or not we should have been in arm in the first place. So a lot of them were labeled baby killers, or they were looked at un, unfairly in terms of they served their country, but they didn't get the heroes welcome people got from World War
Right.
One, World War Two, Korean War, and all the rest. So it's like, yo, we joined the military by force through the
Right.
draft,
Right.
and now we went in, we served our country, didn't have a choice if we wanted to be law-abiding citizen, and then we came back and you labeling us all these things, and then they're seeing the treatment of people who chose not to go, like Muhammad Ali, to name one in particular. So these things started taking on a heightened sense of awareness and importance because we realized something is amiss, something is not right. Because we're
Right.
doing what you're telling us we should do as citizens and members of this tribe called America, but we're not being treated like other members and other parts of the tribe. So what became clear is, at the time I didn't know how to identify it, but it was classism.
Right, right.
You know,
And
so
I never even looked at it that way. I actually had a teacher in high school. Shout out to Mr. Ostrin. He was a Vietnam vet, and he would tell us share like he's the reason why I got so in tune with history, just hearing his stories about it. Because obviously Vietnam is a little bit before my time,
right.
and but he came back with Agent Orange because
Mm,
of the chemicals they were spraying in the trees. So
mm,
like you said, people were coming back with different types of from mental illness all the way down to
yeah,
physical
yes,
illness, and they didn't know, we didn't have this technology that we have now, but they didn't know how to adapt to that. So
right.
man, I can only imagine what, again, that's why I wanted you on to hear these stories. 'Cause I can only imagine what even Brooklyn was like then, with these, heroes come, heroes, because they are heroes,
Hmm.
and again, they were forced to fight a war that they may or may not have wanted to go on to, but they weren't treated as such. So
Hmm.
that's, and again, stuff that I can say that I read in history books. So,
Mm. So
thank
the
you.
sec, no,
Okay.
you're welcome. But the second part of that is, so they had, and I understand is what happens to you is not nearly as important as what you do about what happens to you. But they developed a chip on their shoulder
Yeah.
because they're like, yo, where's the all the benefits and the the what was in it for me to go and do all these things for my country, because a lot of them took life. A lot of them witnessed people that they went through basic with, or maybe they went to school
Hmm.
with, and cousins and uncles, and they got lost in this war. Like they might have come home, amputee, like two arms blown off or blinded, and so the exponential cost of going to war is the untold bill we paid for being not just so much forced to go into that war, but because of classism. And classism cuts across more boundaries than even racism. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, and then there's that when you talk about culturally. So as far as I know, I'm the only two-time recipient of the American Legion Award for Scholastic Excellence, which is given out at every grade level, meaning, the top class in that grade level. So in elementary school, you had one winner, junior high school, you had one winner, and high school, you had one winner. So I was the first to win twice. To my recollection, I'm only
Wow.
one to win twice.
Okay.
And I won in consecutive years because I was bused to a school for the sixth grade that was considered an elementary school. It was like an annex. So it made me eligible, and then aced it, and the mayor gave you an award and all the rest. And
Okay.
so my experience with being busted at school was my introduction to racism directly, because I was the minority. There was four black kids in my class,
Oh wow.
and we were bused to a school where we were the only class with black kids in it, and it was because we were in this annex, and we were all in the same class because the annex didn't separate between gifted and blah 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 whatever. So
Right.
it was kind of easy to separate yourself, but you know uh, I distinguished myself on grades, not just because I was the best of a bad lot, so to speak.
Right.
So you had behavioral issues in there, and you had, I'm gonna call them what they were called, that trailer park trash and all the rest up in there,
Yeah.
because everybody from that went to that annex was all in one classroom. But we had some high achievers and all the rest, and I remember some of their names: Carol Majeski, Bruce Cavachuti, Daniel Kalinowski, Paul Guttenberg. And then we had John Hector, who was black, one of my friends. And I know John had some challenges emotionally. And then we
Yeah.
had Calvin, I forgot Calvin's last name. I'm good with names, but Calvin, he didn't go by his family's last name. So his last name eludes me. But, and then we had Scott Whitney, and we had, it was four black guys because Calvin ended up getting stripped out. And then we had Scott Burrell. We had Scott Whitney, Scott Burrell, John Hector, and myself, right? So
Wow.
that was it, the Four Horsemen. And we actually played at our graduation, and I was in, what do you call it? Um,
On the
in
band,
orchestra. Yeah, band
orchestra
orchestra.
band.
And
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
orchestra because Mr. Portnoy, was the leader of it. He was, he wanted, I guess his dream was all the time to be, so he ran it like it was the orchestra. He wouldn't allow us to say band. And
Gotcha.
for graduation, he was like, he was wound up too tight. He was, he had OCD. But what we did, the four of us, we organized everybody else so that when we got to graduate, we did our own rendition of, dun, 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 dun. And when we got to the breakdown, I bust out a set on the drum set and we did the thing that Marvin Gaye did at the 83 All-Star game in Philly. We revamped it. And he
Oh
was
man.
red in the face, and we knew we were graduating. We didn't have to see him no more, so we pulled it off. Yeah. That's so culturally, I understood there were subsets within
Right.
our community, and then outside of our community, we were not looked upon fondly. And
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
treated us like that regardless of how we carried ourselves. We didn't do anything to get the treatment we got, except we were born this color. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you go back, so basically, if you go back and watch the movie Drumline, there's a
Yes.
scene where Nick Cannon is graduating from high school, and the
Yeah.
band, orchestra, just bust out
Yeah.
and doing their own thing. So before Nick Cannon, there was you and your
That was
crew
me.
that pulled that off.
Not for nothing. Nick Cannon got that from us. And as we go along, there's going to be several other historical context matters. You know what they used to call me on my job, which I'll talk about in a minute? Forrest Gump. So I hadn't seen the movie. Everybody saw it. Oh, Forrest Gump. So when I went to see the movie, the first thing I said was, I'm not slow. And the guy said, no, E, we calling you that because of all the historical stuff
Right. The
that you
experiences.
participated in. Like you
Yeah.
was it's almost like they called you to say, hey, come over here. Something historical is going to happen. And it's still happening to this day. And as we go along, more of that'll come up. So keep that Forrest Gump uh,
Reference.
moniker. Yeah,
Okay.
moniker. Yeah, keep that in the forefront of your thinking. So continue.
Yeah, and like I said, so far this everything. I mean, when I got to elementary school, and this is I think '81, I started kindergarten. Actually, kindergarten was still a half day back then. But
Yes.
when I look at the dynamic, there was kind of a half and half. But by the time I got to sixth grade, it was school was predominantly black and Hispanic and
Mm,
very low, like with other, when I say other races, I mean whites, Asian, Indian, like it was very low.
mm.
And just to see that transition in East New York, and then to hear, where you started, that's like I couldn't even imagine that experience being only four, you know, of black people in one class.
Yeah, and I
And,
must say this too, to
mhm.
touch on the cultural and how was I influenced in the projects in Bushwick, because I'm from Bushwick projects. 849 Flushing Avenue, apartment 12F 11206. I wear that like it's like my social security number. But
Yeah,
but more importantly, the projects was a form of classism. Let me tell you how. Well,
yeah,
across like you had 869, 849, 811, and 24 Humboldt, right? So you had 869, uh, and those four buildings were 20-story buildings. And then on the
right,
other side of the projects, same projects, other side, you had these shorter buildings, 140 Moore Street, 130 Moore Street, 370 Bushwick Avenue, and 390 Bushwick Avenue. And you know why I said it was classism? First
what's
of all,
that?
they had several apartments that had like a lot of bedrooms. And what I know now is they gave the projects were basically affordable housing, right? And
Right.
you went there when you didn't make a certain amount of money. And another thing I must say, the cheese line, bro, getting the peas and stuff, like the government issue stuff they
Oh
were
yeah,
giving away. And my mother making me go get online, but they were giving it out on the other side of the projects. But she made us go over there because we were eligible. So in
right.
my building, you had a lot of working class families. You still had some, maybe at least 60% to 70% of the families, mother and father there. And even if it was dysfunction, they were there. But in 370, 390, you had single parent homes and 5 or 6 kids there, and everybody sleeping 2 and 3 in the bed. And, it was like all of them were going to reform school. Not all of them, but a large percentage of them were going to reform school. They were
Right.
getting locked up. They were, the ones snatching pocketbooks and doing all this other stuff. So on 130 and 140 more, you had people who they were working class or whatever, and it wasn't the congregation of unsavory characters that you had in 370, 390. or at least the reputation 370 and 390 had, the perception we had of them, those two buildings. But they seemed to be more, they took jobs that were definitely not even approaching middle class. It was like they were
Right.
the minimum wage earner type people. And that just seemed to hold true. And then right across the street from Bushwick was 131 Moore Street. And the people on 131 Moore Street, their building had 20 stories and all the rest. But it was on an island by itself. It wasn't physically connected to the project. And
Right.
those people absolutely made sure to designate they were not part of Bushwick projects. I think they did some kind of tenants thing to get together. It wasn't a co-op, but it wasn't like Lindsay Park Towers, which was a co-op. But
Right.
we used to say you got elevators as projects, but we know the difference. If it's a co-op, you got skin in the game. You take care of it different. And
Exactly.
I mentioned the fact that it was classism, but also it was the beginning of certain social deterioration, like people peeing in the elevator, bro,
Yeah.
and litter and spitting and gum everywhere. I would go places and I wouldn't see these black dots on the sidewalk. When you put gum there and it gets dirty and it's stuck there, it's like part of the sidewalk now. And you know, certain areas of town you would go to, you didn't see that. We didn't know certain things were dysfunctional, is what I'm saying, because
Yeah.
children do what they see. It was cultural because we grew up around it. It was normal. It was home. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're just setting so many things off in my mind, and I challenge, shout out to all my fellow people who grew up in boulevard houses. But you made me just think because the building I grew up, so the side of the housing project I grew up on, the other side of the project used to call us the country club because
Mm-hmm.
our buildings were clean.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have the pissy elevators or stairs.
Mm-hmm.
A little later on when maybe one or two other people moved in, but we didn't have that growing up. Like
Yeah.
we sit in front of the building. I couldn't sit out late, but people would sit out in front of our building to 2, 3 in the morning and nothing. And then,
Yeah.
as I left the housing project in the early '90s, then you started seeing that transition. But I never thought about, when housing were potentially putting applicants in buildings, maybe they were classifying them by job scale and what they did because we didn't, and I grew up in the crack era in the '80s, and we didn't have a crack building in the 4
Mm-hmm.
buildings on my side.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a crack house, but I know other buildings in our project that were the crack buildings and the crack houses and stuff like that. So that's like I said, that's a very interesting
Yeah.
perspective that I never would have thought about. Like, are they separating us by class
Oh,
based on
yeah, they
how the
definitely
parents
did.
were? Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that, and just for you bringing that up, and I'm pretty sure people in the comments are going to recognize what side of the project that they grew up on,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll make you think, and it just makes you think more about, how the government treated us, and how this idea that Robert Moses has this projects
Yeah. Yeah.
because he wanted to put a group of people together just to see how they would live, and then once you see that, it just took off, and then it's more and more
Yeah.
and more
Yeah.
projects growing up. And when
Yeah.
you compare New York City to, like, I had a cousin that lived in Maryland, and their projects were 2-family houses.
Yes.
When you look at New Orleans and California, their projects are 2-family townhouses that are all
Yes.
together.
Yeah.
And and then that separate type of classism versus New York City having the buildings
Yeah.
of classism.
They
So that
went up
was,
vertically so they could
yeah,
squeeze more people in a short area. But here's another thing too about the classism, and it's funny. Jay-Z touched on this in the interview he did. And by the way, I'll make sure he gets the word that he needs to come on here because he grew up Brooklyn for sure.
yeah, I would
So
love to
a
have him
quarter
on.
mile, a quarter mile over from us, you had these 3 projects together, but they had the short buildings. So you had Sumner, Tompkins, Marcy. And in the
Yes.
beginning, we talked about them all together. And, as time went along, people identified with their building and their particular circumstances. So
Right.
Sumner and Tompkins and Marcy became separated in terms of which one you came from. Before they used to mention them all together. Now everybody wants to be their own entity.
Right.
And Jay-Z shared about how you got somebody on top of you, somebody on sides of you, and somebody underneath you. And then in the mornings, just getting out the building is an ordeal. Because think about the elevator. You got 20 stories with 10 apartments on every floor.
Floor,
Now
yeah.
let's just say you got to be to school at 8 o'clock. Well, guess what time everybody else got to be to school? So let's just say,
Yeah.
let's go with percentages. Half of the apartments on every floor got a kid that got to be to school at 8 o'clock. So you got, let's just say from floor 5 up, you took the elevator down. But you know what people started doing? They started taking the steps if you wanted to be on time because waiting for the elevator to stop. You don't know if it's working. You pressing the button. Ain't no alarm telling you, unless you can hear the alarm going, you learn to look at the cables and see if the elevator's coming in. It's
Moving.
almost like
Yeah.
putting your ear to the ground and seeing which way the herd is moving. If you see people walking down the steps, sometimes people would peek out on every floor and say, elevator's not working. Oh, like the
Yeah.
town crier. And like, yo, that right there is a distinct project experience. If you haven't lived
Yes.
that, you have no sense of identification of the stress of just getting out of your building. Then, depending on how close you live to the subway, some people had a 10-block walk to the subway or to the
Yeah.
or a 5-block walk to the bus that took them where they were going because you didn't have time to do transfers. Or in the case of if you lived within half a mile or I don't know what it was, a mile, half a mile, whatever. You had to walk to school, bro. And there wasn't no
Yeah.
snow days back then, unless it was
No.
a blizzard like Hurricane Sandy type blizzard, So, well, even though that wasn't a blizzard, but the point is on the great blizzard of when 5 people died in the subway recently. Anyway,
Right.
so the point being, the term hardy doesn't begin to describe people who went through what I went through. Just to get out your building, just to get to where you were going. Then you get in there and you don't have the resources. You don't have the funding. You don't have and then knowing what I know now, since I know they put different food in supermarkets in different neighborhoods or
Yes.
the nutritional value of what we got then, it's amazing we survived. Because guess what? That government cheese right now, I bet you if they did a chemical analysis of it, it's probably one layer over plastic. Yo, do you know what we had to do to make a grilled cheese sandwich?
I know
Yo,
so my grandmother brought this cheese slicer, and so let me tell you a funny trick we used to do because this would be so hard. My grandmother would take a blow dryer and blow over slightly over the top of the cheese, and then she had this cheese slicer that would slice the cheese. It had a little
yeah,
line across, and it rolled
yeah,
in a little rolling
yeah.
wheel, and that's how we sliced the government cheese. You take the hair dryer and to soften it up, and then because otherwise
Oh,
you'd be taking 2 hands, and it's like
yo,
like
yo, listen, let
trying
me
to
tell you
slice
something.
it.
Let me tell you something. Melting that cheese was what they call that? That was basic training for people who cooked up crack because you got to do it like the temperature's got to be just right. You got to shuffle it around a bit.
Oh
It's like
yeah.
Jiffy. It's like think about it, Jiffy Pop popcorn. I don't know if you ever
Mm.
had it. Stovetop Jiffy Pop, not
Yeah,
no
the old
microwave
stovetop.
stuff.
Yes.
And you
Hmm.
had to stand there and move
And
it
shake
around,
it.
and
Yeah.
you had to tell when the kernels was all pop. You had to be listening, smelling, and looking. You had to use all your senses to get it just right. But anyway, this cheese. If you're making a grilled cheese, you have to have the flame low enough where the bread wasn't done before the cheese, and that the cheese could melt enough where it was actually kind of melted. And it was like
Right.
you had to be like a scientist to get it just
To
right.
get it right.
Yo, bro,
Yeah.
you can't make that. You couldn't do that cheese on no electric stove. Get out of here, it ain't gonna work. It had to be gas, butane. Yep, exactly. So another thing too was um, understanding that like the nutritional aspect of growing up. Like
Right.
back then, the government hadn't caught on fully to we can put stuff in certain neighborhoods and
Hmm.
save like well let's call it capitalism, not necessarily government, but the capitalists before the government started putting regulations on stuff, they hadn't
Right.
got to GMOs and all this other stuff. But I'm sure we got the short end of the stick because certain when you got lettuce, it was only good for a day or two. You go to other neighborhoods, it's all green and robust and strong. You could almost surf on it. And
Yeah.
little things like that, is as you grow up and you gain awareness and you try. My uncle told me this when I was 7. Life is like a book, and people that don't travel are stuck in one chapter. So
Yeah.
my first chapter in life was called Bushwick, but the other chapters were called getting around to find out exact. There's this thing called St. Kofi. You got to go back to see where you're at, and then you go forward. The African said it, and I attended this personal development program called Landmark, and Landmark gets you to go back to your earliest programming,
Hmm.
influences, and experiences would help shape you and your perspective on the world. And when you go back to it, you'll be able to decipher what you want to keep, what was dysfunctional, what
Right.
shaped why you, like, for instance, humans are hardwired to look at things cynically, skeptically, and cautiously. And it was a defense mechanism when we weren't the baddest animal in the jungle and the saber-tooth tiger was around the corner and we didn't have the tools to smoke him. You know what I mean?
Right,
Or
right.
like when somebody ate a poison berry and fell out, so now everything you taste, kids make that face.
Yeah,
And nobody taught them that face. They were hardwired with that. Every cell in our body, its goal is to be immortal. And when it senses that it can't keep going, that's why when people survive disasters or fire or gunfire, they go and make babies. Like after 9/11, those firefighters and people who survived, if you check the track record, what they say, check the scoreboard, they went
right.
on and a lot of those firefighters linked up with the wives of them people that perished. And because they
Yeah,
were checking on them and they had the survivors thing and their genes and cells were trying to like be immortal. So they were jumping on the next thing smoking to go to the next port of call, so to speak. So we are hardwired to be cautious and cynical and, skeptical, but more importantly, the survival part of it. Like we've been surviving for the 400 years that we got here,
over 400
and
years. Yes,
then
over. Yeah,
when we got here, and they sold us a used bill of goods about what freedom looked like and what opportunity looked like and what assistance looked like versus when we start looking, well, hey, these people here is qualifying for assistance you never offered us, or why they didn't have to get their wagon out the mud. And Martin Luther King said it in one of his last speeches, how we were set free with no education, no
right.
resources, no land, no tools, no grants, and told make a go of it. And then you wonder why it took 2, 3 generations for us to at least peep our head over, like treading water.
Yeah,
So I'm not gonna. Bill Gates said something famously: "If you're born poor, it's not your fault. If you die poor, that's entirely on you." Now, I describe
exactly.
the acronym of poor. The best acronym I've ever heard is poor. Passing over opportunities repeatedly. Now we live in the
Wow.
information age, and we can more readily get the information. But back then, we didn't have access to the information. So
Hmm.
we did the best we could with what we have. And I came up with a phrase: "You give me a potato, I'm making French fries. You give me a lemon, I'm making lemonade." We were the original MacGyvers. There's another historical perspective. MacGyver was raised in the projects. He was a black man. They just made a
Mm.
series about him, making
Right.
something out of nothing. We've been doing that.
Yeah,
Let me
for
let me tell you
years.
this. Why were we able to cobble together meals like gizzards and God forbid chitlins and all this, because that was what was left over and we had to make meals out of it. That's why
Yeah.
people took certain parts of the turnip. In one area of the country, the top part they threw away, and in another area of the country, they threw the bottom parts away. And if you ask people, why don't you eat the top part? And the person say, well, my grandmother always threw it away. And then you ask other people, why you throw away the top part? They say, well, my grandmother threw it away. So I want to touch on, we talk about generational curses. No, we have generational habits and we have
Yeah.
generational training and generational influences. And that leads to generational outcomes. Like if you eat a high sodium diet and no fiber and no fruit, no vegetable, you probably get hypertension too. You probably be all fat and swollen too. You probably got your belly sticking out a mile in front of you too. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a
Yeah.
good point because in my last podcast, I interviewed the author Woodrow Samuels. Shout out to Coach Woodrow. He talked about in his book "Breaking the Cycles," and he even talked about some of the struggles today. And he talked about his struggles with trusting the police, but it's something that's been
Mm.
ingrained in him
Yeah.
since a kid. So, and I think you touched up on a good point that there are people still today in different walks that still just don't know how to break those cycles. And like you said, growing up, you know, when you can't help, you know, coming into this world poor, but you can help how you leave. And I used
Mm.
to share a story. My aunt Lynn, shout out to my aunt Lynn. She used to work in IS 218 in East New York,
I
and
remember
I used to go
218.
back. And I used to go
Yeah.
back there and talk to the kids all the time because at the time I had a little success. I didn't graduate college, but I had success because I got into the computer early before the generation before me, and it was able to take me to where I am today.
Mm.
But I used to tell them, just because you grow up in the projects doesn't mean that that's your end all be all. Like people used to
Mm.
tell me all the time, well, you don't sound like you grew up in the projects. I'm like, and I used to take offense to that because I was like, well, how are we supposed to sound? Like,
Yeah.
not everybody's gonna, sound like they from quote unquote the streets or from the hood. Some of us actually took advantage of our opportunity. Like
There we go.
I went to Brooklyn Tech. I'm a
I did
Brooklyn Tech
too.
grad. Oh, you
I went
did?
as well. Yeah, yeah.
I was gonna ask you where you went to high school. Wow,
Well,
that's a
can't listen. My vocabulary contains a plethora of sesquipedalian words. I don't have a sign over my head saying what my intelligence level is. Listen, let me share this with you. There was
wow.
there was a test because Three of the best high schools in the country were in
Yeah.
New York: Stuyvesant, Bronx High School of Science, and Brooklyn Tech. And it
Brooklyn
was the
Tech.
same entrance exam to get there, and it was stringent entrance requirements. So I
Yes.
took the test. I passed with a score high enough to go to all three, but the choice was me. It was Brooklyn. And you know what's
Brooklyn.
funny? You talk about people say you don't sound like you're from the project or whatever. Everywhere I go, people say, "Where you from?" New York. Where? Brooklyn. They guess. But and this is what I tell people. I don't say I'm from New York. I say I'm from Brooklyn because,
Yeah.
but it's which Brooklyn? Did you come into Brooklyn in the 90s and on, or did you grow up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s? Because that's
Right.
two distinctly different experiences. Now, this is a fact, and I've traveled to 43 to 50 states and multiple countries. Every single place I've gone, somebody either knows somebody from Brooklyn, say they
Yes.
from Brooklyn, or say they've been to Brooklyn. Now, whether they lying or not is irrelevant. Now, Harlem has a lot of people that understand the cultural and historical significance of Harlem, but you can't go everywhere in the world and somebody say they've been to Harlem, know somebody from Harlem, or lived in Harlem.
Right.
And you can't say that about the Bronx, you can't say that about Staten Island, you can't say that about Queens. So
Correct.
within the five boroughs, we had classism in the boroughs. We had separatism within the boroughs. But at the end of the day, the thing I wanted to touch on was this: when we talk about influences, right?
Hmm.
And different things that shaped us and all the rest. You talked about the police. Bro, we
Yeah.
had housing cops. They were the
Yeah.
first line of defense. And see, the housing cops were designed to be the person that knew everybody. And they were the original police intel. They were
Yeah.
I wouldn't call them informants or whatever, but they were the ones who they had their ear to the ground and could tell which way to herd move. They look like us,
Hmm.
they sound like us, because in
Hmm.
the early days, they had white housing cops. But by the end of the 60s into the 70s, there was no white housing cops.
Yeah.
None. You know
Correct.
why? First of all, they didn't run fast enough. We didn't respect them, and they just couldn't relate to us. And the fourth element is they didn't want to be there, so they
Right.
got shipped
They couldn't
different
relate
places.
to us.
They
Yeah, they
couldn't.
couldn't
They
relate
knew.
to
They
us.
knew they were out of their league,
Yeah.
and so that shaped our first contact with law enforcement. And then,
Right.
if you know, there's just a rites of passage, right? So you reached a point where you had to cross a line
Hmm.
where you're gonna make a decision to take advantage of your opportunities, like you said, and go to school, get a great education, and kind of leave the projects behind, or were you gonna live your life and hang out with the people around you? Like they talk about the difference between being in the world or of the world. So that's
Right.
the line. We didn't know that then, and
Yeah.
so your friends and your uncle and your cousin and everybody else, they all look like you. They were just like you. You don't think they're giving you bad information. They're sharing their experiences with you. They glamorize stuff that we now know is not only just functional, it was cutting you short before you got started. And some people,
Exactly.
again, they went to reform school, or they, had juvenile or juvies and all this other stuff, and they never got to get a chance to get off E, because when they got in those places, now you take one good kid, put him around 10 bad kids. That good kid ain't going, unless he's super exceptional, he ain't gonna be good long. He's gonna
Right.
adapt. And if you
Right.
conversely, you take a bad kid, put him around 10 good kids, it depends on the bad kid, because that bad kid, if he was anything like me, he's gonna convert those other kids. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Because he's gonna be a leader. They're sheep, they're gonna follow
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
So he's gonna influence them. But if you get a bad kid who understands that he's somewhere different and he's adapting to his environment, he'll be the leader of good kids doing good stuff. So when they talk about influences in terms of your environment and being a product of your environment, there's the phrase, you could be in the world but not of the world. And the thing that stuck with me, and now it resonates, is they say your current situation doesn't have to be your final destination.
Destination. Correct. I've definitely heard that.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me about. So it's interesting to hear that you were Brooklyn, and the reason why I was going to ask you about it, because something told me that you went there, because when you said you went to the annex and your experience, but
Yeah,
but tell me about your experience with Brooklyn Tech. Shout out to Tech. Now I had a great 4 years there. Tell me about your experience going to
But,
Brooklyn Tech.
well, first of all, you have four. I was invited not to stay after my first year, but more on that in a minute. But I went in the first day of school. It was all these people coming to register and all the rest. And when I noticed it was a large Asian population
Yeah.
there, and guess what? They created a student body security detail called the SOS, and they patrolled the school, and they were the precursors to the guardian angels. A lot of people may not know about the
Gotcha.
guardian angels,
Yeah.
where they patrol the subways as
Mm-hmm.
volunteer. They were like, people said they're borderline vigilantism or what. No, the police need all the help they can get in the subways. The subways was buck wild. More on the subways in
Right.
a minute. But at any rate, so they had these Asian guys that were called the sauce. And, they basically, like, they didn't take that many classes because they were high achievers. So their grades was so high in the most important classes that they were allowed to do other things
Wow.
in the classes with finger painting and basket weaving, of which it wasn't much of that in tech, but it was
Right.
still some requirements that weren't strenuous and they could do on their own time. So, the going into school, I got to share this. One of my teachers gave us a book on the first day. Now, by the time I got to tech, I'm an avid reader, still am to this day. Malcolm X was acknowledged as one of the most educated men of the 20th or the 19th into the 20th century. And he didn't attend any university or anything in his early developmental stage. He just read, and he read a lot while he was in prison. And he continued to read and educate himself and elevate himself when he got out. So same as Nelson Mandela, he availed himself of what was available to him, and he used it to elevate himself. Basically, these men took all excuses off the table. So before I got to tech, I was reading. My uncle, I got to backtrack and say this. My uncle was a drill sergeant in Nam. He served 2 tours front line. He lied about his age to get in. And he served 2 tours front line and came back without a scratch on the outside. On the inside, he had PTSD. He had all the type of stuff going on with him. But he was a PK, a preacher's kid, because my grandfather was a Pentecostal minister. And he had to go to the revivals. He had to, turn the, because my grandfather wasn't for play. So he had to go along to get along and exhibit forced courtesy to people that, listen, I was raised like this. What do you tell somebody with 2 black eyes? Nothing. They've been told twice already. After all the talking and the civility is done, if you still crossing that line, listen, I talk well with these. There's a whole language that come with this.
Oh yeah.
So at the end of the day, the reason why I said that, my uncle's trainings and everything influenced heavily how I viewed certain things going out into the world. Because he raised me as though I was in Paris Island, because he stayed 2 years with us when he first got home. So when we talk about the things we're just discussing, it's like it's so many influences. I'm not really losing my train of thought. What it is the direction of going with it, because we have time constraints. Because you need days to sit here for me to fully flesh it out. But I'm going to try to do it and with a brevity of words. At the end of the day, when they talk about being sold a used bill of goods, we were never really told what the real prizes were. We were never
Right.
really given clear goals. We were so consumed with survival, we couldn't live a well-rounded life. Because when you consume with survival and paying rent and getting food on the table, you're not thinking about traveling abroad and, going to London and, going to the Bahamas and jet skiing and riding yachts. That's not our story. That's not where
Thank
we
you.
come
Right.
from. So we would have to have a separate podcast for me to continue along the lines of the conversation we had, because I think it'll throw us completely off the goal of giving some sort of general idea of what growing up in Brooklyn is. But being that this is recorded, we can tap into this and have something specific we can speak on at a later time. I'm gonna,
Okay.
request that humbly,
Of
because
course.
it's too many things. It's like I can't give you a haircut over the telephone. So
Right.
this is the telephone, and I can't give you a haircut right now.
Right.
So continue. I'm gonna allow
No,
you to
that's
steer the
good, man.
conversation along,
No,
because we
no,
would get
you
stuck
good,
there.
man.
Yeah, yeah.
This is all good stuff, man. But listen, I opened up the podcast talking about how I was introduced to you, and you got to tell us some stories about Empire, man. And Empire, like I said, was just I live far from it, so I didn't get a chance to go as often. But tell everybody what the experience and what Empire Roller Rink really was and what it meant to the community.
Well, first of all, you were born in when 80s,
No, 76.
76. So when did you first go to Empire?
I would probably say late 80s. It would have to have been sometime after 88 because I know
Okay, so if
I was
you
already
went,
past sixth
okay,
grade.
okay, if you went to Empire after Gloria died, it was known as Empire Roller Skating Family, Empire Family Skating Center. But the original name of Empire is Empire Roller Drome. Empire Roller Drome. Okay. So that's two distinct different eras of Empire. And there's no knock on anybody, but Gloria died, and the rink was closed. Well, actually, not really, because the new Empire opened uh, April Fool's Day of 2000, and that's when they had the new name. Forgive me for a minute, because when he said 90s, I'm thinking about the whole 90s, and there's a reason why I'm going to tell you why the 90s is special in a second. But
Okay.
you did come in, and it was Empire Roller Drome, so I
Mm-hmm.
must make that correction and designation. So, what? Let me tell you about Empire. Number one, it came into existence in 1941.
Wow.
And my mother was born in 1937. Her mother died when she was 2.5 years old, and her brother was months old. And back then, the oldest female relative who could take on the kids took on the kid, because the father had to go out and, he couldn't raise kids. He had to
At
do all
work.
these different, had to
Yeah.
work. Again, my grandfather was a Pentecostal minister. He also breeded horses. He used to be sold leather goods. He used to do a bunch of stuff. He was really like the Godfather. He would have, well, I call them heads of state. Important people in the community would come
Yeah.
into his parlor. They close the door and they come out shaking his hand like he was doing them favors and stuff, because he was that dude. So um, my aunt Babe raised my mother. So she lived there on right off Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, close by Atlantic Avenue. So my aunt Babe wanted to do. My mother, by the time she was 4, was starting to ask about her mother.
Mm-hmm.
It was so Aunt Babe felt sorry for her. So she wanted to do something special for her. Empire just opened across from Ebbets Field,
Yeah.
and Ebbets Field was still open at the time.
Right.
And
Right.
so she went over there, and wasn't a whole bunch of us in there.
Right.
And she
Right.
said to them, "Do you have anything for families? I want to bring my niece here." And the lady looked at her and says, "Come again?" She said, "Well, my niece, her mother died." And she told the story. She said, "Really?" And she gave my aunt 2 complimentary passes to bring my mother there for her 4th
Wow.
birthday. And the reason why I mentioned it, my mother brought me to Empire the day before my 4th birthday, which was a Sunday, because that was the day they had the family session. So it was November 13th, 1966.
Wow.
Okay, so my son was born July 29th, 1989, and on his 4th birthday, I had a party for him at Empire. Now, my
Nice.
daughters came along later. They were
Mm-hmm.
born February 10th and December 12th, respectively, 2003, 10 months apart with my ex-wife. So for all the women listening, she didn't want to wait. That's why, the waiting period didn't occur. So, yeah, I'd say that, and that's the truth. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. So, at any rate, um, on my daughter that was born, Ariana, who was born on February 10th, I had a party for her at Empire in 2007. And my youngest daughter, Anissa, whose birthday was later that year, attended, and Empire closed April of 2007. So
Wow.
generationally, we've all been in there. And my thing about my story with Empire is, I'm going to start with, I went maybe a couple of times a month early on. And by the time my mother started working with the New York City Transit Authority in 1973, just before the summer of 1973. So I was 10 years old that summer. So, she had to work all these ungodly hours. So on Saturdays, I have an older sister who's 4 years older than me, Adrian, and a younger sister named Denise. She's a year and a half younger than me. So Adrian had to kind of escort us around. So I wanted to go skating. So twice a month we was going to Empire. So she got tired of going real quick. Once my mother got this job, she said, "I really want to go." I said, "You know what? I can get in on my own. If you don't say nothing, I won't say nothing. You can go do whatever you want. Just take Niecy with you, and I'll meet up with you, and we'll get home before mommy." And then from the age of 10, I was going to Empire by myself, because I would take the bus
Wow.
there. So,
Yeah.
I went at least twice a month until my mother moved us out of Brooklyn in 77. Memorial Day weekend, to be exact, in 77. I was 14, and my mother moved us out of Brooklyn ostensibly to save my life, because she had a premonition that I wasn't going to live through the summer. And so
Wow.
she married a man she wasn't in love with to move us out the projects. And let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you the timeline. The dude told her, she didn't give him the time of day, because my mother used to bowl. So she didn't give this dude, this is all an Empire story, by the way. I got to
Gotcha.
give you the backstory. So
Yeah.
she told the guy, like, he was short. He didn't appeal. He was from Savannah, Georgia. No knock against Savannah, Georgia, but no. Like, he was kind of a little country Geechee, they called him. But he was working his way through law school, Cornell, and he wanted to go into not just management, they call it the management side of management union relations. So I'll say the name in a second because I'm trying to get to the story. So at any rate, he labor relations, that's what he's going for. So
Labor.
he
Okay.
yeah, so he you know he found out she was bowling. He came, boy, he sucked as a bowler, which my mother, her nickname was Killer Willow. So you could imagine she was killing it, right? So you can't bowl, you really ain't got no chance. Can't dance, can't bowl, you're short from Savannah, you're losing, kid. So finally he asked one of her girlfriends, what I gotta do? He said, well, you really ain't got no shot unless you can help her with her son. He said, what do you mean? If you can help her get her son out the projects, you might have a chance. So the next time he spoke to my mother was like, look, why you keep trying? She said the same things I said. You can't dance, you're short from Savannah, can't bowl, like what? So he said, I can help you get your son out the projects. And my mother stopped him, was like, what? And he saw the look in her eyes like he got her attention. And he went for the goal.
Yeah.
He said, if you marry me, I'll help you get your son out the projects. This was May 1st, 1977. My mother said, well, what do you mean? He said, if you agree to marry me, we pick out a house you want, you marry me and we move in, get your son out the projects. My mother said, how fast you prepared to do that? He said, now. By May 3rd, my mother had a house picked out. They went and closed on it around May 21st of that year, that Friday before May 21st. And May 21st is sticking out. That's either Friday or Sunday. But if you look at the calendar, you go back, you see one of them days is that Friday or Sunday. I don't remember which. My grandfather was a Pentecostal minister. We went to Uniondale, New York, to his living room. He married him, and we moved out the Saturday before of Memorial Weekend, and Memorial Day was that Monday, the 31st. Okay,
Wow.
so now
Wow.
we that's important because I'll touch more on that in a minute. I'm gonna come back to that, but I'm gonna go back to Empire Park. Why that's important? So they moving me out of Brooklyn. I don't want to go. I was back in Brooklyn every day because by then I was on the subways and I was,
Yeah.
once I left the house, I was all over the city, and so I was going back to Brooklyn every Saturday. But I was supposed to be leaving to go back to play basketball, but I had aged out of, because if you was 14 and a half, you no longer go to basketball camp out to the state for free. My mother couldn't afford to send me. She had 3 kids. She was a single parent. So
Yeah.
I was saying I was going to basketball camp. I played ball, but I played ball in the morning, and then I went to Empire and did my skating every Saturday.
Right.
So this went on until the next summer, 1978. I was able to go to Virginia because I had relatives there, and we kind of fudged the admission slip so that I lived in Virginia to qualify for basketball camp. And I played ball in Virginia for summer camp, and I came home Labor Day weekend in '78, right? School year starts right after that. So
Right.
that Sunday, I came home that Saturday. That Sunday morning, my boy Paul Case, who lived on the corner, my mother sent me out to go get some eggs to make breakfast. So when I went to go get the eggs, she said to me, she said, go get some eggs. So I went, Paul said, yo, what's up, bro? I said, what's going on? He said, yo, blah, blah, blah. And he said, yo, they opened up a skating rink 8 blocks from my house. St. Albans roller rink. And I said, really? Yo, all this time I've been going back to Brooklyn to skate. He didn't know where I was going on Saturdays. He thought I was just going to play ball.
Right.
And he
Right.
said, yeah, they had girls and whatever and this and that and the third. And they opened today. I said, what time they open? And he went and asked his sister. And his sister said, 8 to midnight, because his sister's an adult. She was talking about the adult session, but they had a session before that I didn't know about.
Right.
I'm gonna
Right.
stop that story there just to say I traveled back and forth to Brooklyn, and then that weekend I have not been off my skates in an adult skit session for longer than 2 weeks at any point since the last Sunday in August 1978, documented. I'm
Wow.
gonna say that again slow. I have not been off my skates longer than any 2 week period consecutive from the last Sunday in August 1978 to today. Because when this is over, I'm going skating now. I have not been off my skates longer than I can skate better than I can walk or talk. 'Cause I've been talking probably an hour now, and I guess I can do some talking. So the
No, this
reason
is
why it's
good, man.
I didn't even finish with the Empire thing. Relax, relax. This is all to lay the groundwork for how important Empire was, because you asked me about it.
Gotcha.
So you got to have some backstory here. It's not so
Mm-hmm.
simple as saying I skated there and I was the manager or this, that, and the third. No, 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 no. That's way too. I'm undervaluing what Empire meant. because then I'm gonna
Gotcha.
close it up by talking about culturally. So I'm gonna round it up though in the interest of time. So I kept going back and forth and skating there regularly. As you know, I couldn't get in to the adult sessions until I was 18, but I still was traveling there to skate, teen sessions and so on and so forth till I turned 18, and then I made all the adult sessions. So in '83, Empire closed what do you call it, the bingo hall in the back, and they
Uh-huh.
created the back floor. So then it was two
Mm.
floors, and
Ah.
they created an entire different era. And that was the era where Big Bob became the resident DJ, and he took over because the other resident DJ he was incarcerated. I'll just say it like that. And Bob took over, and he took Empire to heights it had never attained before, even though it was already the most well-known rank in the world. He took it really around the globe, and he had a unprecedented 25-year run up until Gloria's death in 1998, where he was the king of
Yeah.
roller skating. And so in Empire, he was on the turntables and I was on the floor. And so when Gloria, I never wanted to work at Empire. I worked at a bunch of other rinks around the city. You talked about Empire versus Skate Key. I got a big Skate Key story too. Skate Key and the Key, because it's two of them. You got Alston Avenue and you got East 138th Street. So
Mm-hmm.
Grand Concourse. It's two different stories. So at any rate, um, I skated there. I never wanted to work at Empire after all the rinks I worked at. If we talking about skating, that's a whole separate conversation. That's a whole side of my life that requires its own separate thing. But I'm trying to get to this Empire piece. So when Gloria died and it reopened, um, it was a lot of stops and starts. Bob was entrusted by Gloria and her will to find uh, um, the people to keep Empire going because her son and
Yeah.
daughter were caught up in the crack era and they were incapable of keeping it going. And they went to 40 different lending institutions and couldn't find anybody to take it over until USA took it over. And it reopened, same name. And like I said, April Fool's Day 2000. But Bob was on them turntables. But I was working there then because now, they needed all hands on deck. So what my
Right.
function then was to train all the floor guards or skate guards, and then I eventually became the manager. So my Empire story is I skated there my whole life from the time I was born until it closed, bro. And culturally, Empire was like you wasn't really from Brooklyn if you never went to Empire at some point. So I'm glad you said you didn't skate there regularly, but that you went. Because it wasn't about if you were
Yeah.
regular. It was just you had to go there to experience it. Now, what night you went determined what your perspective is. Did you go on team night? Were you there on Saturday adult session? Were you there on Tuesday? Were you there on Thursday? All of them had, were you there on gospel night? Did you come for special events? Depending on who you were and when you went, that determines what you came away from there with. I was there for all the smoke. So I check all them boxes off. And, if there's a thing that in Brooklyn on the streets, they said people didn't, like, you couldn't go from project to project unless you was good at one of three things. You had to be good at sports, whether
Mm.
it was like formal boxing, basketball, football, track,
Right.
something people could now see on TV and the newspapers, whatever. You had to be a great dancer, or you had to be able to toss them joints. Now, you might get a visa if you was, what do you say, edified by somebody who was documented and certified. Meaning, you had
Right.
dudes in the neighborhood who were the gatekeepers. Like, you good, safe passage, or we don't know that.
Yeah.
We don't
They
know that.
vouch for you.
And exactly, and if you ain't nobody vouching for you, and you wasn't really about that life, you didn't have good experiences and other projects going around in Brooklyn. So Empire was like that a lot because you had culturally different rinks. There were some people that went to Utica, or they went to Eclipse, or they went to, Park Circle, or they went to these different rinks. But there were 28 rinks open in New York at one time in the five boroughs, and they all closed down. Currently, there's just one in the five boroughs. Exit one in Staten Island called Roller Jam. They all closed, and most of them closed due to zoning. And zoning was the precursor for gentrification. I know that now. It was part of a larger plan. When they talk
Right.
about economic development plan, they took 10 and 20-year looks at neighborhoods. And if you notice in a lot of neighborhoods where they don't have a lot of parking, they have parking garages. Or what else they have a lot of? Storage spaces. So you can squeeze all kinds of
Yeah.
your house into a storage space, so you can get your skis in there. You can get all the stuff we didn't grow up with. We didn't have no need for that in the projects. You had your clothes in the closet, your dishes in the sink, and that was that. But then you had other
That
people
was
moving
it.
into the projects or in these areas where they had to store office equipment, or they were the early entrepreneurs where they worked from wherever they were. They were the original coffee shop millionaires. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you have
Yeah.
all these different things converging. So back to Empire. What I learned in Empire was me. I transcended all the projects, all the rinks, and all the basketball courts because I went everywhere and I participated with everybody. So I was given a universal pass, and I know now I know why they call me Forrest Gump. I was there when they built Roberto Clemente State Park in the Bronx, and they opened it up for basketball.
Mm-hmm.
I was there when they built
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln Plaza, but when it was the influx of Hispanics coming stateside, because once Puerto Rico was really, recognized as a state and there was less Hispanic bias, they started coming over for their slice of the American dream. And then
Right.
I remember when the Jewish people took over Williamsburg, block by
Yeah.
block, section by section,
Yeah.
and they were using the laws existing like you had. Like I know things now that I'm older. You had to advertise in a public a distributed publication that these housing units were available for rent and all the rest. And the Jewish people did it. And Yiddish papers. We don't read Yiddish. We don't know that this you can go here or open house and they're building that. And so they have took over that area, and they just played by the rules that were there. They just learned how to play the
Yeah.
game, and it was there for the taking. All those blighted areas that were industrial areas, that once the industrial revolution slowed down and things were starting to shift over to other areas of business, and there were all these empty spots and all this land, we didn't unify and take it over. And then when it
Right.
came down to gentrification, it became easy for them to, your grandmother left you this uh, brownstone, and all you gotta do is pay the taxes. You didn't pay the money. You don't know how hard it was for her to get it and keep it and pass it along to you. So they offered you a price. It was more money than you had in your pocket before they came along. You sold it. There was no long term vision. There was no sense of
Right.
roots in the community. You came there because it was grandma's house, and you came there because you ain't have to pay no rent. And now you're about to lose the house for taxes, so you said, "Let me get something for it." And then they had all these short sales and all this other stuff. So Empire allowed me to stay off the streets long enough to stay alive long. Because the time for adult skating was prime time for getting killed, locked up, having a lot of
Yeah.
kids.
Fights. Yeah.
So
A lot of stuff
yeah,
happening.
right.
Yeah.
So what happened is I was always in the rink, and the next day I heard who died, who's locked up, who got. I have currently 12 people I personally know that's still incarcerated. And they got incarcerated between 1980 and 1988, when Edward Byrne got smoked in front of the house in Queens, and they created
Yeah.
TNT. They're still
Yeah.
incarcerated, and then they were incarcerated from 12 people I know that were incarcerated between 80 and 88, but I know about 50 people that were incarcerated from 88 to 2000, and a lot of them had to
Wow.
do RICO time, and you know what I'm saying, because
Yeah.
they were equating a vow or two with somebody moving kilos because it was powder
Yeah.
and this was crack, and the crack thing is what got X, Y, and Z. So another thing about Empire that was important to know, there was weed smoking and drinking, and people could bring stuff in there, and it was like a sense of lawlessness on certain nights, and it was like the hood was under one roof. But what's amazing?
Right.
There were a couple of incidents, but it was amazing that there were so few, considering all the wolves and saltwater crocs and apex predators that were under one roof because of skating, bro. It saved a
Yeah.
lot of
It was
lives.
like a
And
safe space.
yeah, yeah. And not only that, we went in feeling one way and we came out feeling another. So if you were tense and you wanted to put your hands on somebody, but it was your skate night, you weren't skating when you came out, that dude survived another day, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's good to hear that, I mean, you watch TV shows and everybody talks. Usually the basketball court is a safe spot, but I would have never thought that a place like Empire, would have been, given that same designation as a safe spot. Like, when we go here, everything, like, it's just all love and love, peace. When you get back to your block, it's different. But while you're here in this moment, we're not going to ruin, you know,
What's going on
the,
inside?
the, the what's going on inside, because again, it's a reflection of the neighborhood and the
Yeah.
community. So that's
And,
that's a
and
good
not
thing to
only that,
hear.
people were given a sense of reverence for the place because of the way their predecessors, aunts, uncles, grandfathers, grandmothers talked about it, and they didn't really want to
Right,
ruin it for them because there was still a sense of I can't mess it up for this person, or people know that's
right.
my uncle or that's my mother, and the word's gonna get back because there was still some of that going into the '80s, into the '90s before
Hmm.
the crack era. Like we lost 4 generations of heterosexual male leaders or potential leaders or at least possibility models. Let me tell you what they were. The guys coming home from Nam, the ones that came home with heroin habits or who were despondent or PTSD or, maimed or whatever. Then we lost a whole generation with the crack era. My God. And then the people who grew up in households that were adversely affected by the crack era. They grew up
Right,
dysfunctionally. They were frontline dysfunction. That was their program and their visualization of what you do and how you act. Then we lost an entire slew of young, promising, intelligent, vibrant black men due to the slaughter of unarmed blacks in the streets. More on that
yeah,
in a minute. And then we lost an entire generation of men who could potentially be fathers and raise families and all the rest because and no knock against anybody for their sexual preferences, but how are you gonna reproduce it? Men don't get with women, women don't get with men. Everything's gonna be a test tube. If the women are with
right,
the women, the men with the men, how are we gonna get together and reproduce naturally? So
right.
just from that standpoint, it's got to be at least a segment of us to carry on. Like the Jewish people talk about the 6 million laws. Man, they done trebled and quadrupled and quintupled the 6 million laws since. And,
Yeah.
and no knock against the Holocaust,
No,
but at the end of
understood.
the
Yeah.
day, that was a short period in history. Not to compare suffering, because if I cut off my finger and you cut off your leg, you can't tell me your leg hurt worse than my finger, because this is my pain I feel. So I would never deny anybody their
Right,
pain, but it's not apples to apples, bro. Not when you have an
right.
extended 400-year story, and we're the only race that specific laws were put on the books to keep us as permanently disenfranchised. Dr. Claude Anderson, some of how he presents his information might offend people, but he's speaking nothing but truth.
That's
What's his
right.
name? Umar Johnson.
Omar,
Dr.
yeah.
Doctor, I'm gonna say it with the respect it deserves. Dr. Umar Johnson. Some people don't like his tonality, and he seems like he's attacking. But you know what? A lie doesn't like being questioned. The truth doesn't mind being scrutinized. How about fact check some of the things he's saying? How about do your own
Yeah.
research and homework? And how about check the sources that you're getting this information from? And then my uncle taught me this when I was 7 as well. Always examine the profit motive. It's a reason why um, the I gotta mention this dude, but I'm not mentioning him. Read between the lines. He had a beef with Twitter because Twitter said during the pandemic, oh, we're making more money than ever. Our bottom line has increased during the pandemic, and we realize our greatest expenditure is people going to the office. So we're gonna not even go back to any of our commercial real estate. So this dude, who I'll leave nameless, is the largest commercial real estate uh, holder in the city of New York. He's got a whole section of
Mm-hmm.
New York with his name on it. And so
Yep.
he didn't want everybody else to do the same, which they ended up doing, and reduce the value of his properties. So it started tit for tat, and they did what they could. They hit the delete button and got him up out of there. But I'm gonna share this right now. I believe there's like they have a dark web. There's
Hmm.
there's a communication line that we ain't on because how else are they organizing, bro?
Right.
How else are they getting information to wide groups of people? I don't believe for a second in coincidence. There's a thing called Occam's razor, learning in science. In
Hmm.
absence of any other theory or explanation, the simplest one is true. They are communicating. They're just not using the smoke signals we can see. We live in an
Right.
information age. They see what we're doing with information. We galvanize voters. We legally won elections. So what do they want to do? They want to change the game and the knife in it, and they want to change the questions because we got some of the answers. And that's
Exactly.
and but we have to be proactive because again the cavalry's not coming. Since we know this is what's going on, they say there's 3 kinds of people: people that don't know what's happening, people that know and don't know what to do, and those that know and just don't care. So if you don't care about how it's going to affect those behind you, Martin Luther King said this. In the end, we're not going to remember the words of our enemies. We're going to remember the silence of our friends. So
Exactly.
now there was a passing that didn't get enough respect, but I'm gonna respect it now. Do you know what Clarence Avant was?
Yeah.
Okay, don't even go into
I
that. That's a whole nother
okay.
podcast. You said
Okay.
yes. Stop right there,
Yes.
because we're gonna give him the respect he deserves by you inviting a panel of people to talk about the influence he had on them.
Got you.
Okay,
Okay.
and they're going to be luminaries. So, and we're going to choose your podcast because it's not. We're not going to take the well-known guys and the guys making a bunch of money. We're going to take a fledgling. I'm going to use that for your podcast because I'm just hearing about it.
Thank
Fledgling podcast. You're known as what's known as an indie podcast.
you. Yes.
Okay, so we're going to take an indie podcast. Now, who would that resonate with from Brooklyn that live in Marcy that had to go to 40 record labels? Like we had to go to Empire for 40 different lending institutions to keep skating alive until he forms his own company. So we're going to form our own information channel and tell our own history ourselves. But there's those of us alive who were touched by these people who are no longer here. So they gave us a
Right.
baton, and it's our job to honor them and to carry that baton and get it in capable hands. This guy Zig Ziglar said, if you share a great idea good enough, eventually it'll fall on good ears. So at any rate, uh, Clarence Avon told me, I got to operate in the background. I was like, why? He said, because they'll kill you. And I didn't understand what he meant until, again, I mentioned my brother several times, and I will because we grew up on the same bricks, and his path is different than mine, but we got a lot of the same teaching. Jay-Z, he said in the line, to kill a man is nothing, but to kill a man while he's still breathing is saying something. Now, let me tell you what he means by that. I'm going to mention a name, Bill Cosby. Let's take a look at what happened with Bill Cosby. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to take sides. Let's just talk about the facts. He was arrested, indicted, and tried on a crime that the statute of limitation had expired. I didn't make up the rules.
Right.
Y'all put a time frame on how long you could try somebody on a charge of rape, right? And so he was arrested, indicted, and tried and convicted on a
Yeah.
crime that statute of limitation had expired. All he said, she said, no DNA evidence. And what I said about my uncle a minute ago, always consider the profit motive or the underlying
Right.
monetary implications. Cosby tried to do it with Oprah. He tried to do like control some broadcasting stuff. He tried to break in.
Yeah. Yeah. He
So
tried to buy
listen,
NBC. I remember
listen,
hearing
but
that.
understand what I'm saying about what I was taught about they'll kill you. So he was known as what? America's dad. There was some, you know
Yes.
what a resentment is? Let me tell you, I learned this in another place. They call it the triangle of self obsession: anger, resentment, and fear. Anger is a reaction to current situations that's happening. Resentment is unresolved anger, and fear is how we react to something that has not happened. So there was an underlying resentment. How dare you have an African American male have he's a doctor, his wife's a lawyer, they live in a
Hmm.
brownstone. Their kids are talking about stuff like college and tuition and traveling abroad and all the rest. The mother and father in the household, and everybody's living a non-dysfunctional lifestyle.
Right.
Now, you tell me another show. Listen, my friends call me Total Recall, so I already know the answer to this. You name me another show that ever existed with those elements in place. And they didn't have one of the characters installed as a comedic relief or a buffoon or a step and fetch it. Because you could talk about family matters and they went through certain things, but they had Urkel. You could talk about good times with the father and the mother, but the show went left when they started up, bringing JJ up more and making it more about JJ
Yeah.
and less about
Yeah.
the mother, father, and the struggles of a family in the project in Chicago. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
Cosby was singular. So to make my point, the first thing they did, they made sure the dentist pockets, but Cosby money is too long. They could never drain him. They just wanted to bring him down a few notches below what his reach was at the time. Then
Right.
they incarcerated him. They incarcerated him. He didn't do no country, like,
Oh,
suspended sentence.
no, he's in the state pen. Yeah.
He was exactly. And then I don't care what his treatment was in there. He was in there. And then the
Right.
next thing is they tried to whitewash his history. They took his show off the air and they tried to besmirch everything he did before. I Spy, when he was one of the first black guys on TV,
Yeah. Yeah.
co-starring in a weekly series. Yo, the comedy he did with no cursing, the groundbreaking stuff he was involved with, the movies with Sidney Poitier, another pioneer that paved the way for people like Martin and Jamie Foxx and Dave Chappelle.
Right.
Pride is kept. Dave Chappelle is not a comedian. He's like Jay-Z. Jay-Z always says, I'm not a rapper. I'm a hustler who can rap. Dave Chappelle is an activist who can do it under the guise of humor, which allows them not to
Yeah.
kill. They tried. That whole
Yeah.
thing was they tried, but you know what? He was a little sharper and he did something they couldn't see coming. He didn't take the money and he left and went somewhere where they couldn't really get to him. And then he
Yeah.
reemerged better than ever. And now you can't kill him because he's like Martin. I might not get to the promised land with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. And the promised land is when you see it, because if you hold it here long enough, eventually you hold it here. As the Bible says, as a man thinketh, so shall he be. Harriet Tubman said this: I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they realized they were slaves. So we're slowly waking up to there's new forms of economic disenfranchisement and slavery. So I'm gonna let you go on from there because that's a whole nother podcast if you choose to accept it.
No, like I said, man, this is all good stuff, and I'm learning a lot. And like I said, that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on the podcast because again, you're giving up. You know, I know East New York, and I've only known really East New York growing up Brooklyn, and you're giving this a whole different perspective that I think a lot of us can resonate and relate to, but then a lot of us is like, you don't even believe what's happening 10 miles, 20 miles from you. You don't even believe that it's a whole different world and, a whole different lifestyle over there. Like this is all, amazing good stuff. I appreciate that. And you talked about a little bit, and you talked about grandma's house. Tell me some of your favorite cuisine growing up, some of your favorite foods that you enjoyed growing up Brooklyn.
But I can say how Brooklyn influenced me as far as cuisine. First of all, when we got there was only a few. I'm gonna have to say Puerto Ricans. I'm not gonna say Hispanics. I'm gonna give them the respect they deserve. The first Hispanic people that were in my area of Brooklyn were Puerto
Puerto
Rican.
Rican. Yep.
They weren't Cuban. They weren't, Latino. They were Puerto Rican, and they took pride in where they came from. So,
Yes.
I got introduced to like cuchi fritos and certain cuisine that was native to them, and then we had an influx of West Indians, and they largely congregated around in the Eastern Parkway area of Brooklyn, and then you started eating things like jerk chicken and
Chicken. Yep.
and curry chicken, and formerly curry was like Indians, like East Indians, but
Right.
when West Indians came, curry took on a whole different connotation, and then like for me, I crawled all over Brooklyn. I went to the because I was bused to a school called John Erickson, 126, and there was a pool there, McCarrion Pool. We went there in the summers with the day camp because it was the biggest public pool that we can go to and swim until they built one in Bushwick. We was the first projects where they built the pool. Oh my God, all kinds of stories with that. But when you talk about cuisine, so uh, when I went to junior high school 126, I perused the neighborhood. So I started being around. I saw that they had a Polish contingent. And then I started hearing about this stuff called rugula, and I tried it. It was good. And then I started, they had other names like, I can't pronounce the names of all the other stuff I tried, but they had dishes native to them. Then I was in a Jewish neighborhood and they had different things that I sampled there. And they used to look at me weird or whatever. I didn't understand, like, we don't go in there and shop. Nobody said nothing to me. So
Right.
I acted like I belonged. They didn't bother me. And then I met some Jewish friends and they explained all their customs and traditions to me. I met
Right.
ultra Orthodox, Hasidic, like, so I got like, I was like a fly on the wall for that. And then they had a series on TV called Unorthodox where they talked about their culture and things that I actually experienced. Yo, bro,
Wow.
there's certain areas and when you, like, for instance, if somebody talking about Brooklyn and they grew up in the 60s and 70s, I said, tell me the difference between Havemeyer Street and Delancey Street. Now, Delancey was right across the bridge in Manhattan. We went there to
Right.
get our gabardines and our quarterfields and you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
but Havemeyer Street was different because you know what it was? there were Jews over there on Delancey Street, but the Jews on half of my street were old school Jews, and um, they ran mom and pop shops, and they lived over where they, the shops they own and all the rest. But
Right.
anyway,
Right.
cuisine wise, in these neighborhoods, because I went there and I bought the gabardines and I did this and did that. I went with the Jewish kid who was with me to, or somebody I might have known from school or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then when it comes to cuisine, like there's certain staples that will tell you like what area of the country somebody migrated to Brooklyn from, like how you made fried chicken. What does your cornbread taste like? If you can't make macaroni and cheese, you can't cook. If you can't make rice, you
Right.
can't cook. You know what I mean? It was like certain things that was like the cornbread, the macaroni and cheese, and the fried chicken. If you can't make that right, you can't cook. If your
Yeah.
chicken was bland or watery, like nah, nah.
Nah.
So and then like back then, I stopped eating beef and pork years ago as a cleanse. Matter of fact, a couple of decades ago, and I kept it up. I didn't do it for any other reason other than a cleanse and then more healthier lifestyle, more
Right.
not vegan but more like healthy,
Cleaner
original
living.
plant based. Right. So
Yeah.
what happened is you know, pork chops. Yo, bro, pork chops, and then they had pork chops smothered with gravy. Yo, if your mom ain't make you no liver and she couldn't make it where it was edible, your mother couldn't cook.
That's
Liver
right.
was cheap, and my mother took it and made it tender, bro. We learned
Yeah.
what a pressure cooker was for. When you ate
Hmm.
ribs, if you had it in a pressure cooker long enough, you didn't rush certain meals. I also learned about chitlins. Once I smelled them cleaning them, I said, "Oh my God!" Because
Yeah.
people eat
Tell.
chitlins and potato salad and and then hog mog and hog head cheese and all this, all these pork products, and then there were pork rinds, and then
Right.
like then people had certain things that was smoked. So as different cultures when I got to different areas, like then I started going to the Italian neighborhoods because I was
Hmm.
playing ball against teams where the gym was in those areas, and we
Right.
go and
Right.
get pizza, or I learned what grandma's pizza was,
Yeah.
and the difference between what we knew about Sicilian slices. All we knew was Sicilian and cheese, but then we went places and they had pepperoni and all these different things, and then I started going down to Carmine Street, and then I started going to the real cultural strongholds of Italians because I had Italian friends. And my friend Frankie Rodriguez, he came up in a biracial situation. His mother was Puerto Rican and his father was Italian. So his
Okay.
father introduced us to a whole lot of Italian stuff. His mother was cooking Puerto Spanish dishes in the house.
Right. Right.
And, the beans and rice and the whole. So cuisine is huge in Brooklyn, and depending on where you are, the local bodega. Like for instance, if you didn't get a ham and cheese and a quarter waters and
Right. A drink. Yep.
the drink and the chips and the penny candy, the jelly
Hmm.
center cookies and just the Mexican dollars and the hot tamale, and I consider this cuisine because candy is cuisine in the hood. Because anything you ate that made you stop being hungry was food.
Was food to you. That's right.
That's right.
Facts.
Yo, bro, there was people. Let me tell you more about cuisine. It goes deeper. One of my friends said he gonna make some French toast. I went with him to his house. He put two slices of bread in the toaster, took it out, sprinkled cinnamon on it, put some syrup on it, and that was his version of French toast.
Oh,
What? And
I
then one of my
never.
friends told me about ghetto pizza. I said, ghetto? He said, I'm going to make me some ghetto pizza. Ghetto pizza. He went home and got a can of biscuits. You got to use not the flaky joints, the other biscuits where, Pillsbury Doughboy biscuit.
Hmm.
And he opened
Hmm.
it up and mashed it all together to make the dough. Then he took some ragu spaghetti sauce, sprinkled over it, put mozzarella cheese in it. Yo, it was phenomenal, bro. Try that sometime. Yo,
I'm gonna
bro,
have to
man.
try that.
Yo, ghetto pizza. And then, so I told you we were the original MacGyvers, yo. And
Yeah.
then you had people doing stuff like, they were, people put ketchup on everything. Because if they
Yes.
didn't, I realized what it is. Most people, if you didn't have nothing else in your house, you had salt, pepper, and ketchup.
Ketchup.
And if you ran out of, you didn't want to just use salt and you didn't want to just use pepper, but the ketchup, they realized, changed the taste of everything. So
Yeah.
everything tastes good. You didn't have to know how to cook. You just had to know how to make it edible and put ketchup on it. People put ketchup
That's
on
right.
steaks because they thought it was the same as Heinz 57 sauce.
Yeah.
We thought Heinz 57 sauce was ketchup. And then there's different types of ketchup. There's Del Monte, there's Hunt's, and then there's
Mhm.
Heinz. They had a commercial. Anticipation is making me wait. It's slow good. All we know is that's the ketchup that you got to beat on the bottle, but you got to beat
That's
on it
right.
just right.
The
Or it
Heinz.
come gushing out, and now you use too much, and your mother be mad. You used all that ketchup. You trying to get it back in the bottle. Yo, bro, you talk about cuisine. When McDonald's first descended, that's the only word you can use. When it descended upon Bushwick, the first McDonald's that came into the Bushwick area was up by Kosciuszko Street Station on the J line.
Okay.
And we went over there. No, the first one was, well, I don't know if it was first or second, but they opened up one right there near the Broadway, the Flushing Avenue stop
Hmm.
on the J train, and you come down the stairs, and it was a McDonald's right there. It's
Right
still
there.
there. They
Yeah.
remodeled all
It's
that.
still there.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. No, no. What I was going to say is, in my entire lifetime, I've only seen one McDonald's close. It was the one by Kosciuszko because the ground was collapsing, and they moved like a block or two over, and then it
Hmm.
became joined up with Popeyes and one of them multi-use kind of joints. I think
Right.
it was, but that's the only one that closed. But at any rate, they opened up McDonald's, bro, and the quarter pounder wasn't no little fine print where they said quarter pound weight after cooking. No, it was a quarter pound when they finished it. It was
Yeah.
huge and the bread
Yeah.
was small. And the Big Mac was two quarter pounders on that bread. It wasn't no two
Yes.
all beef patties. It was thick. Matter
Thick.
of fact,
Yeah.
it was bigger than a hamburger. It was the size that the quarter pounders are now. It was two of those types of meat on the Big Mac, and the milkshakes were real, and the fries were like real potatoes, and like it was a real meal, bro. And so when you talk about cuisine, you cannot leave out two, three entities, and they weren't fast food then. They were using the system that Henry Ford had, like assembly system, get out a lot of food fast, so you can eat your food fast.
Right.
McDonald's changed the game with how they did it, but you had McDonald's, you had Kentucky Fried Chicken, because it was
Hmm.
real chicken and it was good and I worked for them, and then you had White Castles. If you from Brooklyn and you didn't have no, hold on, I'm about to check your Brooklyn card. If you get the wrong answer on this podcast, I'm hanging up. What did we call the burgers in White Castle?
We call them murder burgers.
Okay, there's a second name too. That's acceptable answer.
Um, that's always known them because
Well, you're a little younger than me, so I'll give you
yeah.
a pass on that. You got one of the answers right. Belly whoppers. Because when you eat it, if you see, here's the thing: they would steam the bread, and if you drink any liquid, they blow up in your stomach, and you're gonna blow up somebody's bathroom.
Yes.
So
Well,
we are
that's what a
belly
murder.
bombs. They
Well,
call them
that's what the
belly
murder
whoppers or
burgers.
belly bomb, murder burgers. Those three
That's where the
names.
murder burgers came
You,
from
you
because
got
you were
one of the
going to
three.
murder somebody's
There's
bathroom.
only there's
Yes.
only three names for White Castles. Yeah, now guess what? White Castle is everybody in Brooklyn could tell you their White Castle. You can tell where somebody live. Say, what's the closest White Castle to your house? If they tell you the White Castle, you can narrow down where they live. People didn't realize that's how we found people in the street. What White Castle do you see them at the most? If they were at the White Castle, let's say on Utica and Empire,
That's Crown Heights. Yeah.
it's Crown Heights. We can find it.
Yeah.
If you
Oh
went
yeah.
to the one on Atlantic Avenue, you probably was in
That's
Fort
East New
Greene.
York.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you
No.
probably was on Fort
Oh,
Greene
the
on East
other
New
one.
York.
Okay, going
Yeah,
towards
the other one. It's
downtown.
two of them.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
You
Yes.
talking about
Yes.
the one further down the road? I
Yeah.
was getting ready to say, and I left yours for last because you from there. If you told me where yours was at, I knew where you lived.
Pennsylvania
And
Avenue, man. I live. Listen, so we used to have to go to the one on Atlantic up until like maybe the late '80s, and then they built the one right across the street from Penn Workman, and it
yes,
used to be so bad when it opened. You could order your food, go back upstairs, and wait 2 hours, and go
yeah,
back and
and
get
come
your
back to
food.
get your
That's how
food. Right,
crazy
exactly.
it was.
Because they didn't want nobody didn't want to work there. Because if you got paid, they knew when you got paid. The stick up guys is waiting like you getting no, we getting paid. You just collecting the money for it. So another thing too, and when you talk about those Brooklyn experiences or whatever, like people talk about all these incidents lately in gas stations. We used to just camp out wherever we knew eventually would show up. So it was
Right.
either if you ate White Castles, you could find White Castles. If you like pizza, we found the best pizza in your neighborhood, and eventually you showed up there, or the closest pizza shop. Now, here's another thing about Brooklyn: we had the best water in the city. You know why? Because there were so many of us. The water ran so freely through the system; it was all clean. They have a chance to collect nothing.
Yeah, and the fluoride that they put in there too
Yeah, well,
was
we know about
was
that, but It was the best water. When they tested, I mean, allowing for the fluoride, the water
Right.
was the clean. It was cleaner than Manhattan, Bronx, Queens. Definitely cleaner than Queens. Oh my God! And Staten Island. If you drink water in Staten Island, it's, pardon my expression, you a GG fool. Yeah, yeah, for sure. They was like a whole separate island. The water's being
Yeah.
piped in. Come on, man. So, my reason for saying that is I'm gonna segue into something that we didn't touch on. Like when you talked about cuisine, I'm gonna segue into certain customs and rituals and games and things we did. Because you touched on
Okay.
skating. Skating wasn't big for everybody, even though everybody went to the rink. They
Right.
did a statistic now that said they found out less than 4% of people who lived within 5 miles of a rink went there on a regular basis, if at all. And you know what? I
Wow.
found that to be still true to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the people on Soul Empire from all over the city, they weren't necessarily, the people in Evansville didn't go there that much. The people that lived like right around Eclipse or Skate City or Utica or a Park Circle, they didn't, it was people coming there for that.
Yeah, and that's and that's an interesting point because I tell people all the time, like I maybe went to the Statue of Liberty once. I know I've
Yeah,
gone to the old World Trade Center a couple of times and Empire State Building, but being in New York, you would thought that I would have visited it regularly, but there's probably people that lived outside of New York that probably went
yeah. Well, I'm
to
going to
those
share this
places
with
more
you.
than me.
You get a break because the Statue of Liberty is a New York iconic thing. But I'm gonna give you a Brooklyn iconic thing, and it's a trivial thing, and I'm gonna give it to you, and I'm gonna give you some research on it. And if
Okay.
I'm ever invited back, the first thing I'm gonna
Oh,
do
you
is
will
say,
be.
"What's the answer to this question?"
Okay.
Tell me what's the name of the statue that's waving to the Statue of Liberty and is located in Brooklyn.
I'm gonna have to look it up.
I know
I
you
think
are.
I
I
have
know
an
you
idea
don't know.
where it is. I
Because
think I
guess
have an
what? I've
idea.
been talking to Brooklynites, and I'm only joking with you. You get a pass because you're a, but I've been talking to Brooklynites for a long time, and out of maybe, well, out of thousands, I can't put a number
Right.
on it. I've only had three people tell me they knew what it was, and two of them it happened during the when the internet was kind of big. So I kind of think they found out later in life, not while they were living there. But it's a little known trivia thing, and it's the statue that's actually waving to the Statue of Liberty, and it's located in Brooklyn. I'm not gonna give you no context clues like which neighborhood or
Nah.
whatever. Look it
Yeah, I'm
up.
gonna look it
Yeah,
up. No, no, I'm gonna
yeah.
look it up for sure.
So when you talk about growing up Brooklyn, I'm a segue into two things. First of all, when we talk about landmarks or things that of significance. First of all, like I said, I already mentioned some of I predate gentrification, but the
Right.
seeds of it were when the rinks were closing down, and I found out later it was because of zoning. Zoning was important because they had to get rid of everybody that was there, and once they
Yeah.
got were going, then they can go on with the next phase of the plan, and then they got a plan after that plan. Okay, so um, the most iconic structure in Brooklyn, hands down, is the one Hanson Place, the clock tower, because it was
Yeah.
the tallest freestanding structure in Brooklyn till they just built these new high rises in Lower Brooklyn, with just
Hmm.
that you could walk over the bridge into Manhattan. So those
Yeah.
are recent. So up
Yeah.
until at least 5 years ago, at least five, it might be closer to 9 years now as they were building it, because they might have passed it before it officially opened, because the
Right.
pandemic happened and they had to
Right.
stop construction. So the tallest freestanding structure in the borough of Brooklyn was the clock. When you were driving home from Virginia or whatever, coming up I-95, you could see that clock and you knew how much time you had before you got home, no matter what neighborhood you was in Brooklyn. Yep, when you're coming over
Yeah.
that Verrazano. Yep.
Now that answer I knew, and I knew that answer only because I went to Brooklyn Tech, and when I
Yeah.
used to come up out of
Well,
Atlantic Avenue train
that's why I
station,
touched on it, because
yeah, when I used to
Brooklyn
come
Tech.
out of this train station, I used to
Yeah.
go right around the corner, right down the street from the
Another
clock. Yeah.
trivia question for you. The first American Legion Award ceremony was held in Brooklyn Tech. And the mayor gave me my award in Brooklyn Tech, and then I ended up going there. So since I was the first person to get the award to go to Tech. I know I got to be first. Ain't nobody else get the award but me. I had it. You know what I'm saying? So there. So at the end of the day, Brooklyn Tech uh, 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 well, let me talk about some games and stuff, because
Okay.
when you talk about cuisine, it got to go hand in hand with what games were prevalent in your neighborhood. We had Johnny on the Pony, Coco Livio, Kick the
Coca-Cola.
Can, Hot Peas and
Hmm.
Butter, and Run, Catch, and Kiss, and, which wasn't a game. It was just an excuse to grab the girl you like and kiss her. But also Skelly. crack
Skelly.
tops.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You know, hopscotch,
Hmm.
double dutch. Yo, bro, come on, man. If
Stuff
you
you don't
you
even
know
see no more. You
stuff
don't
you
even
don't
see this.
even see no more, and
Yeah.
it was everywhere in every project because you didn't need a lot of space, and you could get a lot of people to participate. You didn't have to wait
Yeah.
for next. And so, when I went to and these guys, I think, were Italian or Polish. Polish, I think it was. I saw it first. They were doing a bocce ball where they had these little balls and they was knocking it out the rings. I said, yo, that's like Skelly. And the guy said, what's Skelly? I said, I can do this. Let me show you. And I knocked the balls out. They looked at me like, how did he do that? But I got my practice with Skelly,
Skelly. Yeah.
and crack tops. Because with crack tops, for those that don't know, you had these spinning tops that we tied the string around and you pull a string and the top spin. So we had these contests whose top could spin the longest. And then we had we had Dunkin' yo-yos, we had yo-yo spinning contests. We used to play
Mm.
each other. Brooklyn is the most competitive place I've ever been in. But more on that in a
Amen.
minute. But anyway, so crack tops, you spin the top and the top is spinning, and whoever top fall over first, you got to put your top in this circle, and everybody that was in the contest gets to take a turn because it was a needle point on the end where we could try to crack your top. That's why it's called crack top. And if you hit it just right, you would split somebody's top.
Hmm.
So in Brooklyn, we would practice hours just so we could crack your top and have bragging rights. So crack tops was serious. Yo, I seen blood spilled over crack tops, bro. Because guys
Wow.
tried to switch which top they put in there. Nah, that one. Because they had paint on it and little. It was like graffiti. It was actually the first graffiti I saw because they went from paint tops to
Hmm.
marking the walls in the stairway to graduating to full blown graffiti. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So they had these tops painted, and then with Skelly, whenever they was doing pavement, tar was the best because it was heavy and your top
Yeah.
slide further. So we would find out, yo, they paving the street over on Plasky. We would go a mile just to wait for the thing to go through while it was soft, scoop up enough tar to make 5 or 6 tops. And then we
Yep.
would go in the supermarkets. We didn't look at it as shoplifting. We was just taking the tops. We was taking the tops off all the Gillette shaving cream because they had the tops with the little lip in the front. So
Hmm.
you could pluck your top like this.
Oh
It would
yeah.
slide better, and they were durable. Yo, crazy. People was after a while, like if you was a real G, you could take any top and make it work. But those were like the Ferraris of Skelly tops. And then you put clay in and Play-Doh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything you put
We
in
use
made it
clay.
different. Use
Yeah. We
Play-Doh?
use Yeah, we use clay, Play-Doh. We used to use the milk tops. The milk
Yeah.
tops, the gallon milk tops are popular, and then the
Yes.
old
Right.
push-up ice cream. So
Yes.
when you used to eat the push-up ice cream,
Yeah.
there was a top that pushed up, and
Yeah.
you take the
That's
stick
right.
out of it, and that
Yep.
made a great top as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. That's a good one because, um, like, usually you didn't get the bottom of the ice cream because you had to share it with your younger sibling. So my sister got the top. No, yeah, yeah.
Oh man,
So yeah, that's
you shared a lot of great experiences. We're definitely gonna have to do a part two to this, man, because I definitely want to hear more.
yeah.
Lastly, I just want to say, how would you summarize the overall impact of growing up in Brooklyn on your life and who you are today?
Okay, I'm gonna summarize it by saying this. Um, Brooklyn shaped me because I was just trying to touch on how competitive it was, and it was because it was so many people competing for space and time and attention and money and resources. Like you had to be assertive and in a lot of cases aggressive, or you know you didn't get it. You didn't get there.
Right,
If you played
right,
ball, you couldn't lose. You might not get back on the court. Whether it was
right.
handball, whether it was football, baseball, and Skelly, cracked up, whatever it was intense competition every single time we came out. It was competition to get on the elevator. The elevator be packed, and somebody trying to squeeze on. People get off. It's
Get
gonna
over,
stop because
yeah.
if you go over the weight in the elevator,
It's gonna
and
get
people are
stuck.
getting full blown arguments, and everybody in the elevator say, "Close the door," and then that person will leave because it ain't just that person who they riffing with because they wanted to take their frustrations out on somebody because maybe it was 7 people getting dressed in the bathroom in your house and you couldn't iron your shirt and you late for work and now you can't get on the elevator. You don't waited for 5 elevators to go by instead of just walking
Right.
down the steps and you want to take it out on this person who told you close the elevator door because you want to be selfish. You only think about you. So
Yeah.
it shaped me in because I'm an intense individual. I'm passionate. I'm also very assertive and I'm a survivor. And again, I'm a MacGyver. I'm a solutions oriented guy because at the end of the day, after all the praying, wishing, hoping, planning, and plotting is done and scheming, you got to do something. And
Yeah.
they told me if the road I'm on is not leading me where I want to go, find a new road. So I had to find roads that got me where I was going efficiently, economically, because something else I learned in Brooklyn, and I learned this starkly, how valuable time is. Because
Yes.
every age from 10 till now I'm 60, I can name at least 5 or 6 names of people I know intimately that ain't no longer here. Because they got either leaked out, shot, burned, smoking
Right.
relation, car accidents, suicide, homicide, fires, AIDS, drug addiction, overdose, 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, and a host of things that I didn't
Right.
even know. And guess what? Did I save even one time old age?
No.
Nope. I'm talking about people I grew up with side by side. So I learned the value of time. And also, it shaped me into who I am today because I read this by Aristotle. Spend your time reading other men's writings so you can gain easily what they worked hard for. And I realized as I grew later in life, and I want to share this because I ain't got no shame with this. I've been clean 33 years and 7 months today,
Wow.
right?
Congratulations. Yes, that's
Okay,
amazing.
so now, anybody telling you to clean, it's a period of time it wasn't. So, I've been retired. I worked a 35-year career with the New York City Transit Authority. I retired from there. I didn't get, well, you say documentation beats conversation. Well, I'm going to show this before we end this podcast. So I didn't retire because of a disability. I didn't tap out. I didn't leave early. No knock to people that left on medical disabilities or whatever. No, I did my entire time and I met the age requirements to retire from the job. And the reason why this is important, they told me I wasn't going to live to be 21. And they were talking about statistics from where I was born and raised. That's
Yep.
right, bro. You see that universal. I'm the universal roller. I roll on anything. So so at the end of the day, yeah, and it says pensioner there. I'll show it close to the screen. Pensioner. That's right. Ain't no shame in my
Yeah.
game. You could document my entire journey. So at the end of the day, right? Don't take a picture of that and try to use it. You'll be arrested for a felony. Yeah,
No, of
by the way.
course not.
For all you absconders out there. No, anyway. So so the reason why I mentioned it, I started the day after my 20th birthday because I got hurt playing ball. My mother said have a plan B. I worked that job. And it wasn't even playing B, C, D, or E or F. But I took it, and she told me I was making more money in the airport than I was making there. And she said, "Yo, that's just the starting wage. They got benefits. You can ride, blah, blah." She said, "And they have a pension." I didn't know. I'm 20 years old. I didn't think about a pension. But guess
Right,
what?
right.
For the last 5 years and 8 months, I've been collecting, and they said the trick is not just to retire, but to collect as long as you work. So it's 35 years and 8 months down, and I mean it's 5 years and 8 months down, and it's uh, um, 30 years and 4 months to go to hit the break even point. Because I
Right.
want them to pay me off the job as long as they pay me while I was on it. And in my transit career, they want me to write a book on it. That's a whole other story. That's why I got the nickname Forrest Gump. So when you talk about how it shaped me, all of those things were my Brooklyn experiences because my mother got me into projects and she said, "Now you gotta make this count." And so
Yes.
there's a movie called Saving Private Ryan, and at the end, if you know that scene when he told um, Private Ryan, "Make it count." Yo,
Yeah.
people died so I can live. And
Yeah.
you know how people talk about, remember that Verizon commercial when the guy said, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?" He had 2,500
Yeah.
people behind him. Well, I
Yeah.
got 2,500 people behind me that personally poured into me, held me, nurtured me, trained me, tutored me, coached me, prayed over me, prayed with me, prayed for me.
Yeah.
And you know something? And I honor them by going forth. So how it shaped me today to what I do. One of the things I do is I don't sell real estate. I mean, life insurance. What I do is I educate people on how vital of a important part it is of the financial underpinnings of your financial intelligence package. Because people don't have
Mm.
financial intelligence. You're not gonna have
No.
economic empowerment unless you have financial intelligence. You gotta learn the rules of the game so you can play the game. So
Right.
people running off broke knowledge and getting caught bits and pieces. I'll give you an example. You're from Brooklyn, and I feel comfortable challenging you on this. Give a man a fish, feed him for the night. Teach a man to fish you.
You eat for a lifetime.
Yeah, okay, tell me the third part of that. Exactly. Stop right there.
Yeah,
We,
I don't.
you probably didn't hear it because that's the wisdom of the ages. They didn't pass it down to us unfettered. It's like if we talked a little longer, I could tell you how certain information we got. We got most of it. We didn't get all of it. It's like a
Right.
combination lock. Some parts are missing. The third part of that is teach a man to teach and you feed the world. I'm going to send you the link to a
Ah.
podcast that best explains that, but I can give you a biblical reference. Jesus started by himself. He got one disciple, then he got 12. He went around the world. I'm not here to judge Christianity. I'm not here to say
No.
it's good, bad, or whatever. But the fact is, it's everywhere in the world. And he
Yeah.
started with the power of one. So the financial underpinning is the importance of life insurance. And he tied to something I touched on earlier. They said, how are we going to stop? They marching and protesting. Somebody said something and they underplayed it, but now I'm taking up that. And I'm going to challenge and empower you and some others to do the same. So here's the thing. They said, if those young men were insured, this would have stopped long ago. And I didn't understand that then. This is how I understand it. The insurance companies would raise holy hell if these young men were slaughtered and their families were getting $300,000, $500,000, $1 million tax free because you'll be eating at their bottom line. The number one profiting industry in the United States today, profiting, look it up, is commercial banking. We're going to have a whole nother topic
Okay.
on that. And the
Yeah.
second greatest profiting industry in the United States is insurance, not just life insurance, all types of insurance. A
Yeah.
tremendous part of the wealth of this country is flowing through insurance. And you know something? We will discuss more on how you can stick your hand in and take out as much money as you're inclined to take out because it's there for the taking. And the entry bar is low. People just don't have the information. So more on that will be upcoming. I'm gonna do a shameless plug here. I will still
No.
roller skate. Hold on, I still roller skate. Look, I'm controlling the mic right now. I'm doing
No.
my
No. No. You
closing
good? I was
comment.
gonna tell you to keep going. No, I'm
No, no,
telling you to
okay.
keep going.
So I currently skate actively everywhere. Anybody will tell you. So I skate in Cascade, which is the most famous active rink in the world. I'm a co-founder of the Cascade Dream Team, which is the first rink, to our knowledge, that was formed specifically not only to promote a rink, because a lot of groups were associated and closely affiliated with rinks, but they weren't formed to promote a rink and to tell people about the overall benefits of skating, because the American Medical Association tells you that outside of swimming, there's nothing that grades out higher, but the pandemic proved that you can't swim when you ain't got no water, but people were skating in their living rooms and skating in their basements and skating on tennis courts, and
Yeah.
it gave skating an unprecedented amount of um, eyeballs on it, right? So the next thing is that team um, did several notable performances, but I'm just going to list one. We performed on the Warriors' home court while they were on Boston's home floor in Game 4 of the that year's
Uh,
NBA
the
Finals.
finals.
And we've
Yeah.
done a bunch of stuff, but just go to Cascade Dream Team page on Instagram. You can see more. But the point that I'm making is we've turned the team into a nonprofit, and my current efforts are to develop into a foundation so it can live on beyond our time breathing here. They say what you do for you dies. What you do for others lives forever. And we want to leave a foundation. We're going to take this nonprofit and develop a foundation, because foundations, they offer funding, they offer grants, they offer resources to
Hmm.
disenfranchised people or people who to traditional sources may not get what they need to get where they're
Right.
trying to go. So
Right.
I'm ending with that. When I say shameless plug, it's a plug for skating, it's a plug for Cascade, but it's also a plug for the fact that um, my information will be made readily available by the gentleman here. If you have questions about scrolling, saving, and protecting your money, if you want to know about living benefits for life insurance policies, because we don't tell younger people to worry about the end. We tell them life insurance policy can benefit you while you're alive, but the cost of getting it increases every year as you get older. So get it when you're young and get as much as you can afford while you're
Yes.
young and you're insurable, because you might get diagnosed for something that rules you uninsurable and you can't get the
Yeah.
insurance. And then it's too late to get it after you're injured, sick, hurt, or even dead. And here's the final thing I'm gonna say. You're gonna start seeing something as we go forward, and we're gonna use this podcast as part of it, and it's gonna be called Operation Fund Me Not. GoFundMe did a lot of good for a lot of things, but its intended purpose was not to for funerals
Right.
or when your house burned down. I mean, if you have to do what you got to do, you got to do what you got to do. But we're going to educate people on there. It's a lot easier to earmark $25 or $50 a month to be ready for that than to try to raise 8 to 12 grand in a week. And
Yeah.
ask the same people that scuffling like you to take money from the living to take care of the dead. And what did the
Hmm.
Bible say? Don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow will bring its own problem. But if we take care of business today, we ain't got to worry about tomorrow. And by the way, I'm a product of the product and everybody in my household. So challenge me on that because documentation beats conversation. And with that, I know you was trying to get the wrap up. So I'm going to be proactive and thank you for inviting me on the blind because we never met before now.
Right.
But we definitely going to be talking and I'm going to funnel some people to you that you absolutely need to hear from because we have so many enriching, fulfilling stories that any direction you want to go in, there's a look. Every champion has a journey, and every journey has a story. So we're
Yeah.
all champions if we live to this point, especially as African American males in the country called America, because we are the most endangered species on the planet.
Facts.
And two of
Facts.
us made it out of the most famous borough that ever was, that ever will be, Brooklyn. Brooklyn in the
Amen
house.
to that. Amen to
That's
that.
right.
Listen, it's been a pleasure having you on. I thank you. We're definitely going to do a follow up to this because I know we didn't get to a lot of the questions, but you answered a lot of the questions just in general conversation. So I appreciate you coming on. We'll make sure we get your socials and get your information when the podcast goes live and is available. But thank you again for coming on, my Brooklyn brother. I appreciate the knowledge. I appreciate a lot of the knowledge. I'm going to go back and retake notes because you dropped a lot of good gems.
Yeah, thank you.
And as I always end the podcast, you could have spent your time doing anything in the world, but you spent it with us, me and Eric, and I appreciate it. Yo, big up Brooklyn. Yo, we out.
We out.
The Growing Up Brooklyn podcast is a Black Pharaoh Gaming production.